Vikings are often painted as stoic warriors, hard, hungry, and fueled by nothing but meat, mead, and sheer willpower. But that image leaves something out, something deeply human. Because beneath the armor and battle scars, they had cravings, guilty pleasures. And when archaeologists looked past the war axes and longships, they uncovered something unexpected. Vikings had their own version of junk food. From honey-drenched pastries to fermented flavor bombs, the Norse didn't just fight and farm, they indulged. And those indulgences reveal a side of Viking life few ever talk about. One filled with trade secrets, midnight cravings, and ancient food hacks that wouldn't feel out of place today. These warriors didn't just live hard, they snacked hard, and what they reached for when no one was watching. That says more about their world than any sword ever could. The myth that pre-modern peoples rarely consumed sweets doesn't hold up to scrutiny, particularly for the Vikings. Archaeological evidence from settlements throughout Scandinavia reveals a culture with a pronounced and sophisticated sweet tooth, one that they satisfied through remarkably creative means, despite living in a region where sugarcane and sugar beets were completely unknown. Honey stood as the cornerstone of Viking sweetness, functioning as their primary sweetener, much as refined sugar does in our modern diet. Evidence from numerous sites suggests a pattern of honey consumption that went well beyond practical needs. A particularly telling discovery at Oseberg, Norway revealed specialized containers designed specifically for honey storage, with residue analysis showing they were repeatedly refilled, suggesting regular consumption rather than rare medicinal use. This honey obsession drove remarkable innovation. The Vikings developed specialized tools for locating wild beehives and extracting honey with minimal damage to the colonies, allowing for sustainable harvesting. They practiced a primitive form of beekeeping, creating artificial hives from hollow logs or woven straw structures called skeps. This level of investment in honey production suggests it wasn't merely an occasional treat, but a craved commodity worth significant effort to secure. The sweetness fixation extended beyond raw honey. Viking settlements yield evidence of berry preservation on a scale that exceeds purely nutritional needs. Excavations at Jorvik, modern-day York, UK, revealed specialized ceramic vessels containing residue from concentrated bilberry and cranberry preparations, preserved in such a way that maximized their sweetness rather than simply their longevity. Several archaeological sites have yielded evidence of what can only be described as Viking candy. A particularly well-preserved example from a trading settlement in Hedeby shows this wasn't merely sweetened food, but a dedicated treat, shaped into small bite-sized pieces with no practical purpose beyond immediate pleasure. A confection made from honey, boiled down to crystallization, combined with crushed hazelnuts or walnuts, essentially a primitive form of brittle. Their sweet tooth even drove significant trade. Excavated Viking ships have yielded preserved fruits, particularly dried figs, dates, and raisins, originating from lands as distant as the Mediterranean and North Africa. The presence of these luxury items at multiple social levels, not just in elite burials, suggests widespread demand. More telling is evidence that these imported sweet treats sometimes traveled over 2,000 miles to reach Viking settlements, a remarkable investment of resources for something with no nutritional advantages over local foods. The Viking relationship with sweetness wasn't simply about rare treats. Evidence suggests they systematically altered everyday foods to enhance sweetness. Daily porridge, for example, frequently contains traces of sweet additions even in non-elite households. Apple pieces, rose hips, or honey integration appear with surprising regularity in food residue analysis from cooking vessels, suggesting sweetening was a daily priority rather than an occasional luxury. But sugar wasn't their only craving. Just like us, the Vikings didn't always have time or the patience for a full meal. So when hunger hit mid-journey or mid-task, they turned to something shockingly familiar: fast food, Norse style. The modern concept of fast food seems quintessentially contemporary. a product of our hurried lifestyles and industrialized food systems. Yet Vikings developed their own sophisticated versions of convenient, ready-to-eat foods that served the same psychological and practical needs our drive-thrus and delivery apps fulfill today. The Viking equivalent of fast food centered around a concept archaeologists call portable nutrition, foods specifically designed to be eaten without preparation, often with one hand, while engaged in other activities. The most ubiquitous example was a hard flatbread called hårdbröd or hard bread, remarkably similar in concept to modern energy bars. Analysis of preserved specimens from several settlements shows these were not simple emergency rations, but carefully formulated convenience foods. Typically made from barley or rye, these flatbreads were often fortified with crushed nuts, dried fruits, and even rendered animal fat, creating a dense, shelf-stable food product, delivering approximately 200 to 300 calories per small piece. What makes these particularly interesting is their distribution pattern in archaeological sites. They appear not just in long-voyage ship remains, where preserved food would be expected, but in local settlements in context suggesting everyday consumption. More telling is the discovery of specialized containers for these flatbreads in numerous household excavations, equivalent to our modern snack drawers, indicating they weren't merely travel food, but everyday convenience items reached for when cooking was impractical. The Viking version of street food is evidenced in urban trading centers like Hedeby and Jorvik. Archaeological excavations reveal specialized cooking areas that show no connection to residential spaces, essentially the Norse equivalent of food stalls. Analysis of waste pits associated with these areas shows a pattern consistent with commercial food preparation. High volumes of identical food remains processed in consistent ways, suggesting standardized fast food offerings. The menu appears to have featured items like meat skewers, small, meat-filled pastries similar to modern handheld pies, and a form of quick-fried fish cake. All foods that could be prepared in advance, held at serving temperature, and consumed quickly while standing. What's even more fascinating is the evidence of branded fast food. Several cooking sites show distinctive cooking methods and seasoning profiles that appear consistently across multiple years of accumulated waste, suggesting something akin to signature recipes or house specialties. One site in Jorvik shows evidence of a distinctive fish cake preparation, using a specific blend of dill and mustard seeds that appears nowhere else in the settlement, but remains consistent through several decades of that cooking site's operation. For Vikings on the move, evidence shows they developed their own version of trail mix, or portable snack food. Excavated pouches and small containers from numerous sites reveal mixtures of dried meat, nuts, and dried berries in consistent proportions, suggesting deliberate formulation rather than random storage. Analysis of one particularly well-preserved example from a ship burial shows a carefully prepared mixture of dried venison, hazelnuts, and cranberries in roughly equal proportions, a combination that provides balanced nutrition, but also delivers the key flavor profile modern food science identifies as most satisfying. Archaeological evidence also reveals the Viking equivalent of processed meat snacks. Sites throughout Scandinavia show specialized smoking structures used to produce a form of dried, smoked meat strips remarkably similar to modern jerky. Analysis of residue from these operations suggests the meat was often flavored with juniper, salt, and sometimes honey, creating a sweet-savory profile that would have stimulated the same dopamine reward pathways triggered by modern junk foods. If there's one aspect of Viking food culture that most dramatically contradicts our sanitized historical understanding, it's their deliberate cultivation and apparent craving for extremely strong, funky, and fermented flavors that would challenge even the most adventurous modern palate. Far from being merely preservation methods born of necessity, Vikings actively sought out and enhanced these powerful flavor profiles. The centerpiece of Viking fermented food culture was surströmming, fermented sea fish, typically herring. Modern versions of this traditional food are famous for their overwhelming odor, often described as one of the most pungent foods in the world, the Viking version was even more intensely flavored. Analysis of preservation vessels from coastal settlements shows they used a significantly longer fermentation period than modern production, sometimes extending to months rather than weeks, resulting in extreme protein breakdown and flavor compound development. What makes this particularly interesting isn't just that Vikings tolerated this intense flavor, but that evidence suggests they deliberately enhanced it. Residue analysis from serving vessels shows the addition of further fermented ingredients to already fermented fish, essentially layering fermentation flavors for maximum impact. This pattern appears too consistently to represent spoilage or accident. It indicates deliberate culinary choice. Modern flavor science sheds light on the Viking love for bold tastes. In cold environments, our ability to detect subtle flavors drops, essentially muting the taste buds. To combat this sensory dulling, Vikings cranked the flavor dial up. Archaeological finds support this. Fermentation structures with stable temperatures suggest they weren't just preserving food, they were crafting complex flavors on purpose. Even more intriguing, these fermented foods produced mood-altering compounds like GABA, which modern science links to reduced anxiety. So, their taste for strong, funky flavors wasn't just about enjoyment. It may have helped them stay mentally balanced through long, brutal winters. The Viking relationship with indulgent foods wasn't merely a matter of individual cravings, but was deeply embedded in their social structures, status signaling, and communal identity. Archaeological evidence reveals a complex social choreography around food indulgences that defies our simplified understanding of Viking culture. The feast, or blot, represented the most visible form of socially sanctioned indulgence in Viking society. These weren't simply meals, but elaborate cultural performances where excessive consumption served specific social purposes. Archaeological evidence from feasting halls shows these events featured consumption levels that far exceeded nutritional requirements, essentially institutionalized overeating. Analysis of waste pits associated with feasting sites reveals bone assemblages suggesting meat consumption of up to 4 to 5 pounds per person during major events, a level of indulgence comparable to modern competitive eating. Status signaling through specific indulgences appears consistently throughout Viking archaeological records. High-status burials frequently contain specialized eating and drinking vessels that analysis shows were used exclusively for specific luxury consumables. Dedicated containers for imported wines, exotic fruits, or particularly valued delicacies. This suggests these foods weren't simply enjoyed for their flavor, but performed important work in displaying and reinforcing social hierarchy, much as certain premium brands or exclusive foods serve as status markers in modern society. Gender differences in Viking food indulgences reveal another layer of social complexity. Certain treats were strongly gendered in Viking society. Analysis of grave goods shows honey processing equipment appears disproportionately in female graves, suggesting women controlled this important sweetener. Conversely, specialized drinking horns for mead consumption appear more frequently in male burial contexts. This gendered pattern suggests certain indulgences served as markers of masculine or feminine identity. Children's relationship with treat foods appears to have held special significance in Viking culture. Several archaeological sites have yielded small, carefully crafted containers clearly designed for children's use, containing residue of sweetened foods or special preparations not found in adult contexts. One particularly poignant example from a child's grave in Sweden contained a miniature wooden box with traces of honey and berries, suggesting parents provided special treats to children in ways remarkably similar to modern practices. When comparing Viking indulgences to their modern counterparts, a fascinating pattern emerges. Viking indulgences were worlds apart from modern junk food. Their sweeteners, mainly honey, fruit sugars, and berry concentrates, had lower glycemic impact and came with health perks like antioxidants and antimicrobial compounds. Even their treats packed more protein, 15 to 25% of calories versus 2 to 5% today, boosting satiety and stabilizing blood sugar. Their fats came from natural sources like fish, nuts, and pastured animals, rich in omega-3s and free from today's harmful trans fats and seed oils. And unlike modern snacks stripped of nutrition, Viking treats retained fiber, often 4 to 8 grams per serving, thanks to unrefined ingredients and simpler processing methods. But while Viking treats were nutritionally superior to modern junk food, their true guilty pleasures came from far beyond Scandinavia. When only the richest flavors would do, they turned to the forbidden and the foreign, imported luxuries that transformed simple indulgence into a statement of power, status, and desire. The popular image of Vikings as isolated northern warriors belies the reality of their extensive trade networks, connections that brought a remarkable array of exotic foods into Viking settlements. Vikings went to extraordinary lengths to obtain foreign delicacies, transforming these imported foods into the ultimate indulgences, their version of exclusive, high-end junk food that served both pleasure and status functions. Wine stands as perhaps the most archaeologically visible of these imported luxuries. Unlike their native fermented beverages, primarily beer and mead, wine was entirely exotic to Viking territories, requiring importation from southern regions. Analysis of residues from specialized glass vessels found in high-status Viking settlements shows they consumed wines from as far away as the Byzantine Empire and North Africa. These weren't occasional shipments, but regular imports, with dedicated trade routes specifically for wine transport. What makes this particularly fascinating is the extreme resource investment these imports represented. Isotope analysis of wine residues from a chieftain's hall in Denmark revealed wine that originated in present-day Syria, a journey of over 2,500 miles, or 4,000 kilometers, that would have involved multiple intermediaries and transportation modes. The economic value of such imports was staggering. Historical records suggest a single amphora of quality wine could be exchanged for goods worth several months of skilled labor. Exotic fruits appear frequently in high-status Viking contexts, their pits and seeds preserved in archaeological middens. Figs, dates, and specific citrus varieties appear with surprising regularity in settlements that could never produce them locally. A particularly telling excavation at Birka, Sweden revealed a merchant's dwelling containing preserved peach stones, a fruit that would have required transport from the Mediterranean across thousands of miles, representing an extraordinary luxury. The Vikings' desire for foreign spices drove some of their most extensive trade connections. Black pepper, cinnamon, cardamom, and saffron, none native to Northern Europe, appear in multiple Viking contexts, particularly in high-status settlements. A remarkably preserved spice container from a ship burial in Norway contained both black pepper and cinnamon that residue analysis shows originated in India and Sri Lanka, respectively, requiring transport across nearly half the known world at that time. Yet, these foreign delicacies weren't the only things making their way into Viking lands. Some arrivals weren't goods, but legends, terrifying ones. To see what kept even these fearless raiders awake at night, click on our next video right here.